Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Nicklin. I'm the Chief Executive of IAgrE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining our March presentation today. Today, I'd like to welcome IAgrE member and Chartered Environmentalist Marion Perrett-Pearson. Marion is a Senior Agricultural Advisor for Severn Trent and works with farmers in the Upper Avon and Leam catchment areas to reduce water pollution using Severn Trent funded schemes. But she's not going to talk to us about that today. What Marion is going to talk to us about is the work she did prior to Severn Trent, where she was involved in education and more specifically about writing a GCSE textbook about agriculture in the Caribbean. So just before Marion starts, you're all currently muted. If you'd like to ask questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll unmute you so you can ask in person. Over to you, Marion.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you very much for everybody coming, particularly because it's such a lovely day. So I'm sure lots of other people are drinking cider in the garden, but at the moment, it's you guys are here, so thank you very much. Caribbean agriculture, it's pretty much a whistle-stop tour about what I found out about the Caribbean. I was involved in writing a textbook, and I'll get into that in a second. So 10 crazy days, 6 flights, 3 islands, 24 farm visits, and 4,000 photographs were involved in this. So it was a whistle-stop tour. Right, so the brief that I was given was to write a secondary edition of a Caribbean secondary education certificate textbook. So CSEC is their equivalent of GCSE, so 14 to 16-year-olds do a course with an exam at the end. And this was a textbook for that course. I needed to visit Caribbean islands to take photographs and learn case studies. And I also needed to make sure that the new edition reflected the updated syllabus, which is what the government had just rewritten the syllabus for CSEC agricultural science. And I also had to produce a book to manage a writing schedule. So although the brief sounds fairly straightforward, there were a few flaws in this. Namely, the length of the book had to be 400 pages, which it does sound like an awful lot. In fact, it is huge amounts. But you have to include lots of other things in there as well, like practice questions, case studies, things like this that actually take up space within a book, sort of mind maps to help the students do things, specific little areas for vocabulary that they need to know. When I was asked to do this, it was April 2019, and I had only so much remaining leave left because I'd started at Severn Trent. And my leave was, I only had about a week, so I had to do like 2 Saturdays in the week before so that I could actually go. There was the new syllabus had nothing taken out of the old one. So although it was 400 pages, there was more that had to go into those 400 pages without actually having taken anything out of the syllabus. So that actually made it quite a bit harder to then go, well, I want more photographs and so forth. And also, obviously, the managed writing schedule was 4 months, which, if those of you who know anything about writing a book, and in fact, the editor said to me, have you ever written a book before? And I was sort of trying to be convincing that I knew what I was doing. And I said, no, actually, I haven't. And he said, that's actually a really good thing. And it's because if you'd ever written a book before, there was no way I would have agreed to this time frame. And of course, having a new full-time job, which also didn't help particularly. So here we have the Caribbean, those of you who aren't familiar with the region. The places of particular interest, because I flew from London into Trinidad, and then went from Trinidad to Grenada, and then came back, that's part of the Windward Isles, came back to Trinidad, and then flew from Trinidad to Jamaica, and then flew from Jamaica to Miami, and then home again. So it was 9 days on the ground, but 10 days if you include the fact that one was a day flight. So the things that were really important to me with this textbook was when I read the first edition, which had, funny enough, taken 10 years to write, the first edition. They'd had a Caribbean gentleman write it. Was the fact that it was actually incredibly difficult. The concepts were very verbose. The diagrams overly complicated, very small text, and so forth. So I was quite keen to make it more like a European textbook that you'd expect from like, for example, a GCSE in the UK. So the idea was to have a better visual appeal, simplify the concepts, cover the new techniques that are being developed in the Caribbean and around the world that would benefit students in the future. So it's the idea that what you're teaching them, they can take forward and then come up with innovations themselves. I was particularly keen on the fact that of farm safety, there was absolutely no safety in the first edition. So I did think there were aspects that could easily be slotted in, especially for young people. And to make it relevant to the students by including these agricultural differences throughout the Caribbean. The first edition had been written by somebody in Trinidad, and although it was incredibly Caribbean specific, it was a Trinidadian textbook. So it didn't really include the whole region. I said, well, I want to include case studies from all the different islands, and the publisher said yes, but not Guyana. I went, what, as you do? Believe it or not, piracy is still a problem in the Caribbean, and Guyana has a form of state-sponsored piracy where the government policy is to buy one textbook and then distribute photocopies to all the schools. So not that one. So the Caribbean farming that this included, Caribbean farming it's more like sort of allotment farming. It's got everything in it. If you can imagine growing it or rearing it, they will do it. So it's the range of food is vastly more than if you think about our types of farming in the UK. Okay, so we've got all the different fruit and vegetables. We've got different flowers which are exported as well. We've got livestock, which includes rabbits. It comes down to poultry, eggs, beekeeping, anything that you can get your hands on, they will breed and manage and then turn into like small industries. So we've got fish farming, you've got rum and the sugarcane, you've got chocolate, coffee, nuts, spices, cannabis, you name it. Everybody is a farmer, and everybody has a small amount of land where they grow whatever it is they want, or they keep their goats or whatever. So what tended to happen was the fact that with this textbook, they needed to know the whole process. So it wasn't so much me saying to them, well, you know, yes, beekeeping happens and you get honey. It was more from everything from how to build a hive and the dimensions of a hive to the number of bees. It was basic farming from every perspective. You had to start with the beginning, fish farming, how to set up your own fish farm, and then the processing that goes with the produce. So you've got to harvest, you've got to manage the youngsters, harvest the adults, go into the processing, and then into the marketing. So the whole sort of agricultural science, it was all of it. It was actually the management of all food production in the Caribbean islands. So it wasn't so much that you think about agriculture as something you grow, you harvest, and then it's gone. It was really the whole process needed to be taught. Here's a few of the examples that obviously we don't get in the UK, being the Buffalipso, so the buffalo crossed with Calypso cattle. Calypsos are quite aggressive cattle. So by doing the Buffalipso cross, they've sort of generated a much calmer type of cow that can be managed for milk. Tilapia, I think it's pretty much like a type of goldfish. There was an awful lot of what seemed to be goldfish farming. So people seem to be enjoying that. Right, so this is sort of moving into some of the issues that the book had to address. So I'd never particularly come across pradial larceny as an issue, although it's described, it's the problem of small farms. So if you think about the fact that almost every farm in the Caribbean is like an unlocked allotment, so it's very prone to theft. And if you think about the sort of things that can be stolen, it's particularly sort of ripe fruit, small livestock that just sort of wander around. And you think, well, actually, you feel like that everything will be very safe, but people do steal things, even though you've got small communities. Once it's been taken and then, you know, slaughtered and eaten, you know, you can't get those things back. So in St. Lucia, the problem's so great that the escalation and frequency of agricultural theft has actually been identified as a reason why farmers are abandoning the land. And St. Lucia itself is putting pounds in place to hold animals overnight, and issuing ID cards to the farmers, so there's an official market route. The punishments vary massively. So about 6 months before I went to Jamaica, 2 men were arrested for the theft of 9 goats, and they were sentenced to 5 years in prison with hard labour. But you know, there's that line between, well, that's something that happens for 9 goats, but what happens to 5 mangoes? And that can be a really big problem, because obviously you're dealing with relative levels of poverty. There's a lot of food security research going on in Trinidad at the moment. So it's been realised that the livestock species which are bred in the Caribbean were actually imported by the colonialists. So as the pastures got poorer, you've got high costs of supplementary feed, and you've got pressure on land use, particularly from housing, roads, and so forth. What they've been looking at, they've been researching at the Sugarcane Research Feed Centre in Trinidad, is how to domesticate native Caribbean species. And these are some of the species they're looking at. So the agouti there is a cross between a guinea pig and a rat, really. Feeds on fruit and anything else that it can find. And they're looking at seeing how they can sort of manage it in such a way that it can't escape, but it could freely graze in an area to then generate enough meat to make it worth farming. The red brocket doe on the right, again, they're looking at how do they domesticate it in such a way that they can get the deer so that they're more like cattle, if you like, or they're not jumping over fences and escaping everywhere. And that's Dingle, who was a very tame red brocket doe, who thought that my notebook looked like a mango. So I nearly lost that one on the second day. So as well, in this Sugarcane Research Centre, they're looking at animal feed research. So one of the things that they were doing was, this is Lucana, which is also known as wild tamarind. It's actually quite a useful forage plant because it contains 24% protein. But unfortunately, the high levels of protein have resulted in the plant generating secondary metabolites, which are called memazine, and these are toxic to rabbits and poultry. Now, it's also toxic to goats and sheep. But the feed centres, they discovered that they inoculated the adult ruminants, so the immunity was passed on to offspring, which is a really, a massive leap forward, because this is a local plant and, it is native to the Caribbean. Now that the goats and the sheep at the centre eat the Lucana without any problem, but you might think, well, you could just take the memazine directly from the plant, but unfortunately it's stunted plant growth. So they couldn't breed the Lucana without memazine when they took it out at a genetic level. But obviously you can get an inoculation, but it's just that way of making sure that spreading inoculation to rabbits and poultry is much harder than getting it through bred livestock. And the reason why it's so popular is because it does grow wild. It's wild tamarind. And there it is. More research that went into the book. This one is the golden apple. This is sort of an example of how slow things can move in the Caribbean. So the golden apple tree is indigenous to the Caribbean, but it is a very tall tree, and as such it makes harvesting very difficult. So you've got the choice of either somebody up a ladder taking high risks and getting the apples down that way, or they fall naturally and then spoil on the ground. So what they wanted to do was to prevent that ripe fruit from falling to the ground, being damaged. So they thought they would cross this with the golden dwarf apple. Now, the golden dwarf plant is obviously much easier to harvest from, but as the word dwarf implies, it has very small fruit. So this particular research institute thought that, well, if they cross the tall and the dwarf species, hopefully they'll get large fruit on a short tree. Now, this tree has low boughs, but still the fruit's a little bit too high to harvest easily. And the research has taken 30 years. This guy's not in any hurry to find the answer. The products that the students needed to know about were obviously exportable products. So if you think about cocoa, if you think about chocolate, they wanted to know how things are grown, how things are processed, and the products that come from that. So just a quick whistle stop. I don't know if you know much about cocoa, anybody, but you've got there the cocoa pod on the top left. Going down, you can see broken a pod open. You've got the nibs that are still surrounded by the base in there, and then you've got the nibs being separated by hand. So almost all the processes where there's bulk are done by hand. Then you've got grinding of the nibs, and then the heating of the product, and then this really rather nice, what was a chocolate Baileys really, and the chocolate at the bottom, Juve chocolate. I have to say the Baileys was something that we didn't bring back because it was so good. Myself and the assistant publisher who came with me decided to have an evening in one night. So nutmeg, this is in Grenada again. This is Douglas Estates. So the Douglas, they were there from colonial times. You can see in the bottom right the old colonial buildings. Well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So this is a nutmeg estate where they're still using exactly the same technique to produce nutmeg oil and nutmeg as a spice. This is a rum estate. See, it gets better and better. You see, you go to, you can write a children's textbook and off you go to all the alcoholic places. So this is Sugarcane on the rum estate in Grenada. This is Rivers Estate. You can see the height of the sugarcane on the left relative to the guy that was showing me around. No health and safety in the centre, where you've got a couple of chaps separating bagasse and molasses in the middle. Bagasse is the byproduct, so it's used for animal feed. And as it's a waste product of the sugar industry, it's actually readily available at low cost. Unfortunately, because of the high sugar content, and it's got rapid microbial activity, it has limited uses, but as an immediate animal feed, it's widely available at low cost. What you can see there is the molasses being heated, the coppers, where you're using distillation going on, and obviously distillation with wood as a fuel. It requires a lot of heat, but with that wood as a fuel, it's leading to deforestation of Grenada's tropical rainforest. And as you can see on the right, Rivers Rum, which is, as you at the top right-hand corner, you can see it's 75% ABV. 75% ABV rum can't actually be brought by tourists who need to fly. So if you're, but you can get it if you're just ordering a drink. So whenever you go to the Caribbean, be aware that if you order a drink containing rum, you may very well get something that's considerably stronger than you get in the UK. This is actually on Jamaica, so we missed the sugarcane harvesting. We didn't see any in Grenada, but on Jamaica, you can see the sugarcane harvesting, and this is actually a harvester, as you can see, like with the grabber on the top, and then the chap removing it from the fields on the trailer. So again, in Jamaica, you've got there the coffee being produced from the Blue Mountains. It was small farmers who handpicked the coffee, and then they take those sacks to a processing plant. They're sorted by flotation, and then the contents of the coffee per box of quality quality product is paid for. Okay, it was actually quite interesting because whenever you go anywhere, you want to see a certain thing. My driver would just go, "Oh, I want to see. She wants to see this," and somebody will run down to somebody else and go, "Oh, have you got such and such?" And it's like, "Yes, there's some down here." And then they drive around the corner, and you'd end up sort of holding onto trees as you staggered down a hill, or part of the Blue Mountains, clearly, and then taking a load of photographs of something that was there. And then as you came back up, they go, "Oh, do you want photos of this and this and this?" Like, "Oh, brilliant." So sorting out 4,000 photographs was quite a challenge when it came to this. Right, that brings me on to aquaculture, as they beautifully call it in the book, fish farming. So this is tilapia. We've got here a fish pool. The whole process of fish farming is taught in the book. So literally from the number of fish that you can have in a certain size tank is there. On the picture on the right, you can see a post with some mesh on it, and those are actually feed sacks on the left. It's not just litter. So obviously a heronry had set up in the trees around the pool, and the solution on this particular farm was security, as they called it. They pointed to security. Security was somebody sitting on a chair with a saucepan, who would hit the saucepan periodically to scare off the herons. I'm not sure how well it worked because there were quite a few herons flying around. As I said, the book includes everything from designing ponds to breeding fingerlings, what to feed, how to manage the water, some of the weeds that there you can see there, because you've got stagnant water, you've got pond weeds collecting at the edge of this, and these are the feeds, and literally everything from the volume of feed that you need to put in for a certain volume of fish and so forth. So it went into a lot of depth, and I had to learn a lot very, very quickly, particularly as fish isn't something I know a huge amount about. This is the mango grafting solution, which I wanted to take a series of photographs, because one of the ways to teach students, if you don't have immediate access to video, is by them seeing a series of photographs and then being able to follow those steps. And I knew I wanted to include this, so whenever I saw a linear sequence of something, I was like, right, let me take photos of that as it happens. So the problem you got here is that pests like sweet mangoes just as much as people do. And the Mirabeau Research Institute, this is again in Grenada, they recognise that sourness and resistance to pests are actually genetically linked. So the sour mangoes are grown from seed, and once that stock is 4 to 5 months old, they do a top or cleft graft, which you can see in the photographs on the top there. So they do that graft, and they're using that to secure a sweet mango scion into the sour mango stock plant. Okay, what you can see is they're taping it there, securing it with budding tape, and then wrapping it in a plastic bag. And it's in that plastic bag for about 3 weeks. So once the plastic's been removed and all the leaves have hardened, which can take another 1 to 2 months depending on the time of year, the plant can then be sold to the farmers. But as you can see here, the time from the initial sour seed to sweet mango plant is about 7 months. But it's a long-term consideration because mango trees bear fruit 10 to 15 years in. So nothing's done in the short term. Okay, so the one you're all thinking, I need to know about this, is the cannabis. Now, cannabis law in Jamaica is 6 plants for personal consumption. So everybody and anybody can grow themselves 6 plants. To research them, you need to have a license. Now, research institutes and licensing is subject to political whims. So whether or not somebody is pro or against the production of cannabis. So this particular research facility is actually at the University of Kingston in Jamaica. They're trying to grow marijuana that doesn't have active THC, which is tetrahydrocannabidiol, Okay, so they're trying to remove that from the plants, but it does have the benefits of CBD, which is cannabis. Okay. Now, the license for this particular greenhouse hadn't been reinstated, but it hadn't been revoked. And while he had a number of postgraduate students, the professor said, well, I can't destroy. He said, I don't want to raise any flags, so please be very discreet about this, because I don't want to, I can't, if I destroy these plants, if you've got a 3 or 5 year PhD, you're not in a position to destroy plants and then regrow them to then get into the condition where you want to be working through this. So he said, I can't do a full destruction. He said, I'm just waiting until somebody decides that actually politically it's a good idea to carry on doing our own research and then move it forward. So what you can see there is some of the research where he's got a cross going on. But there were quite a lot of postgrads sitting around under trees looking very relaxed. So I'm wondering how much actual research was going on at all. Hydroponics and greenhouse technology is coming into its own in the Caribbean, and it's actually quite an affluent method of vegetable and fruit growth while avoiding pests. So obviously they're trying to use substrates instead of using soils. It's quite a good idea, and there were lots of different varieties of these. So there was, as you can see on this one, this is the A-frame. There was a pyramid. There were all sorts of I mean, these are tanks for your deep rooting crops and so forth. So they're very excited, the research about hydroponics, and it was something quite interesting. Although if you look there, it's actually quite a simple system. So I was quite tempted until, to see if I could set one up at home as a way of producing lettuce. I don't think the climate north of Coventry will quite grow crops like that. Okay, so sort of coming back to the textbook a little bit, the syllabus itself has set a school-based assessment at 40% of the final grade. So the kids have got 60% to do in an exam, and then 40% where they have to do 2 investigations. One is a crop investigation and one's a broiler investigation. And both of those have to have full cost analyses. So what you've got here, this is actually all at a school. So you can see the hen with the chicks, you can see the hen house at the school, and you can see there the defeathering machine at the school. What's interesting, what I thought it was incredibly interesting to me, was that given the titles that they have to do, so for example, investigate the effects of broiler rations containing different levels of crude protein on the production of chicken meat and its byproduct. Okay, but the students, they receive the chicks, they feed the birds, they turn the litter, they wash the waterers, they sanitize the abattoir surface, they slaughter and eviscerate and pluck, as well as package the birds for sale to their school canteen and other local consumers. And it's a compulsory part of this GCSE. And what I found absolutely flabbergasting, because I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't they? But can you imagine in the UK if you had agricultural science GCSE and this was one of the things they had to do, and it was actually a compulsory part of the course to slaughter chickens? I can just imagine like the press on that. But why wouldn't you? The students need to learn how to do it and do it properly. So very interesting. Now there are issues that needed to go through the textbook that would benefit the society in the Caribbean later on. So I know that sounds a bit strange, but when you look at some of the pest problems, they actually needed to be, you needed an education beyond those pest problems. So, for example, in the palm trees, you've got South American palm weevil, which is an invasive species that's been around in Trinidad for forever. But the palm weevil is a vector of the red ring nematode. And this red ring nematode affects the palm tree by disrupting water and photosynthesis pathways. So the problem with the weevil is the larva, which and that larvae is evolved to affect, damage or cut plant tissue. And it only takes about 30 weevil larvae to kill a mature palm tree. So it's not very many. So the actual palm weevil emits, when you kill it, it emits a pheromone which attracts more weevils. Farmers think it's a temporary problem and they leave the tree standing. So even though the trees looks like the ones here on the left of this slide, the beetle goes through its full life cycle. Females will just fly to the next tree and infects it. The only way to get rid of both weevil and nematode is to cut down the tree and burn the wood. And the problem the farmers have is they don't understand the fact they actually have to completely cut down the tree and burn it to prevent this carrying on. So there were a number of cases where I was in the research facilities and people going, you need to include this. And I'm like, well, yes, actually, I do. Because even if one kid tells their grandparents or one kid tells their dad or one kid grows up and then realizes that this is something, remembers something about the nematode, that they need to cut down the palm tree and burn the wood when the palm weevils got hold of it, that's a really important way forward to make a difference, if you like, with this book. So that brings me from pests to the regulation of chemicals, strengths and usage. So it's actually a bit, I was quite shocked at how much chemical and the percentages of the chemicals were available, readily available, with no licensing, no regulation at all, and you could just walk into, like, if you like, a supermarket and buy them off the shelf. So, for example, there, metaldehyde slug pellets are totally banned in the UK, although that's only just happened. It's a hot, wet climate, so fungi is rife, and the use of chemicals, I felt, was more like uninformed gardeners. So there's not so much, if you think about the amount that farmers use, and then in the UK, and then you think about what somebody might use. I remember somebody telling me that his wife used 3 times as much slug pellets on her garden with roses in as he would put on 30 hectares. So if you look here at the fact that these are high strength chemicals, they've been imported from China, there's little notice paid of the dosage, the safety equipment for application. And also, there's also a large use of GM crops, which have come over from America. But these also have an unregulated dose of chemicals as well. So that the whole sort of, the chemicals can easily be working contrary to the technology which has been imported. So there's more work that needs to be done that I couldn't put in a GCSE level textbook, apart from the fact that every time they want it, it was described in the syllabus that I had to actually say which chemicals should go on each plant. I totally sort of disagreed with that. So every time I put sort of on the application of an insecticide, ensure that you are using the right product against the right pest. Otherwise it doesn't work, and make sure that those products are in the right quantity, they've been diluted appropriately, using safety equipment, and only if necessary, because if you don't need to put it on, don't put it on. Don't know how much that will soak into the students though. This brings me to some of the other aspects that I saw in the Caribbean. So the environmental degradation, although it does actually have a place in the textbook, the idea here, we've got an irrigated farm that I was visiting, farmer completely unaware of the impact that they were having, irrigating their farm from rivers in the highlands, complete lack of regulation, no idea what was happening downstream of their land, didn't particularly mind, getting a nice price for whatever that was they were growing as the water ran along the end of the pipe there. Not a huge problem right now, but obviously 5 years time it will be a much bigger problem, especially as that farm can afford to buy more plastic hose because they're earning more money. So more plastic hose, more extraction, unregulated abstraction from a river, results problems downstream. So more unregulated environmental degradation. We've got here, there's no regulation at all about what's spread to land. Fertilizers used willy-nilly, and that's causing a lot of runoff into rivers, which is causing eutrophication. So we've got here water hyacinth. Now, I was quite surprised. This is the River Cobra, which is in Jamaica, and it's actually cleared regularly by the government. You'd think that because of the cost of clearing it, they might actually sort of look at the source problem of this. But 4 months earlier, this had been entirely cleared, this section of river. And this is water hyacinth buildup. Another one here, we've got the deforestation. It's quite hard to see, but you can see some burning on the left photo on the mountain. You can see in the middle, we've got the burnt area, or one of the burnt areas, not the same one, obviously. It's slash and burns being used as a form of land management, particularly in mountainous areas. And over on the right there, you can see that the land's starting to recover and they'll be planting trees in there. There are other resource pressures going on in the Caribbean. You've got cruises. That's actually a problem for food security as well locally, because there are massive gluts of produce that's suddenly required, and that causes some problems in the villages in particular. You've got the pollution there, and some of that pradial larceny problem is an impact with the cruising, because people can sell directly to people, pick a bucket of mangoes and then sell it directly to a cruise ship. You've got pollution. This is from the flight into Trinidad. It's actually oil producing countries as well, but this would just be a slick from industry coming down the river as I flew into Trinidad's airport. And you've also got the usual housing pressure, population, refugees from Venezuela are causing a lot of problems with housing. We've got here, I thought, as you're all mechanical engineers, aren't you? Quite a lot of people. So I thought I'd show you some of the most high-tech tractor that I saw on the whole time that I was on the island. So this was in Jamaica, this lovely case, I think it's case 2 tractor there. Although most of them were like the ones on the right. One at the top, one at the bottom's not bad. That was a Chinese one, I think. They're quite narrow base tractors. Everything seemed to be really narrow on the bases. And this one is, again, I was really quite surprised, given how close the Caribbean is to America, that a lot of their mechanical stuff is actually both sold and donated by China. So I was quite interested to see how much China has an influence on the Caribbean as well. So having taken photographs for a textbook, obviously I came home and then continued to write the book, and then found that I was short of some photographs. So here are a few that obviously had to be taken in my kitchen, in a butcher's in Warwickshire, and one in the garden there of some garden tools. I think it's really quite important that you have what's relatively low cost technology, but that can be used to increase the precision that farming is done there. So for example, like the weather stations, it's to actually create quite a simple weather station isn't that difficult. Obviously this it's tech, but it's fairly low cost tech. The weather stations that they have are these huge clumsy things that have been spread out all over the place. But when it comes to things like, they're very good at monitoring. So there's lots of blackboards everywhere with people putting numbers on for how much they were feeding things and how much milk by litre they were getting. So even though it's manually done, if they could count up, for example, the flying days of aphids to work out if you needed to spray for that, for example. On the right hand side, you can see these are feed bins at Moral College in Warwickshire. These are weighted feed bins, so you can see how much each cow eats. And while this is done by ear tags with a large number of cattle, you can, if you only had a few cows and you weighed the food, you know what they ate. And then the feed ration for the fattening of the cattle. I think when you're writing a textbook, I think it's quite important to have a nice view. So sort of to wrap this up a bit, in Grenada there, I could write from the bar, which was not an unpleasant view, as you can see, although at one point I did manage to go for a swim and drown my phone, which is a bit of a shame. But the hotel in Jamaica, they also did take away pina coladas from the bar. So I will say that it was probably better to have been a publisher, because my publisher at the time, you can see the swimming pool, she was wearing a bikini and lying on one of the sunbeds. So obviously not having to write the book was a benefit for her. But if you're going to write a book, you might as well have a good review. So thank you for listening. I've actually been in touch with the publisher, who is the senior editor at Macmillan Caribbean Books, and he said that while it's listed on Amazon and the MacEd website, most of the sales are direct to Caribbean stockists and bookshops. Clearly, the UK is not a massive market for agricultural science and the Caribbean books. You can rent or buy it online, believe it or not, in US dollars. The RRP is $18.99, but I can't find anywhere at the moment in the UK, apart from direct from the publishers, where you can buy it at the moment if you want to buy it. If there is interest, I can get a delivery to IAgrE, but we'll have to include postage and packing on the cost to send it out, but it wouldn't be very much, because I get a 50% discount anyway, so it would be less than that $18.99, I should think. Okay, so there it is, my smiling goat on this picture. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. It's me done.
Excellent, that was brilliant, that was. Right, so we've got a few questions. Alan Plum, do you want to make a start?
Charlie, well, I'll dive in first then. Hi, Marion. That was amazing, actually. The range of topics that you've covered, incredible. Yeah, a bit tongue-in-cheek, I've put in the question. I think what they needed is an HSE Agricultural Health and Safety Inspector. And a lot of people on this call will know that was I'd been doing that for about 35 years. But anyway, certainly there were some interesting things, and the pesticide you mentioned there. But to take the issue more widely, I presume you came across a lot of new crops, processes, whatever you wanted, production methods. So how did you go about finding resources to pad this out, to actually produce the book? And okay, where did you get your health and safety advice from?
Yeah, well, health and safety advice came from work training we do at Severn Trent, but also Yellow Wellies. It's a good, great organisation. Yeah, the information, you saw my little yellow notebook that the deer was trying to eat. That was literally, it was going and standing next to people and they told me that it was full by the time I came home. So everything was firsthand. It was desperate. That's actually why they sent me, because they said it would cost them more money to source photographs in the UK, to employ somebody to find all the photographs, and some of them they wouldn't be able to find, than it was to just send me to go and take them. So that's why they paid for the trip, was having to take all the photographs. So, and there are probably, dare I say it, there are gaps. There are places where I went, oh, I don't know anything about that. I'll have to almost leave it out, if you like. It's you can't go on Google for this stuff. That you can go on Google sometimes for some photographs, sort of national plants, but you couldn't go. Sorry, I seem to have done that. You couldn't go on Google and find out this sort of information.
Oh, thank you.
I did come back with 2 little books from a place called Hypro, which is where they sell all the everything to do with chickens. And I came back with 2 little books on how to breed chickens, because it was something I had no idea about. It's like whole parts of agriculture that you don't do anything with. You know, there's sort of 30 pages on soil. Well, that was easy. I know about that. But the other bits, where you have to sort of calculate how much to put in how many fish you can get in a pond. You know, it's like, what? Are you kidding me? So when someone says this is a really good idea, just check the time frame and find out exactly what you have to do in that time frame, because there were a lot of sort of 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the mornings all over that summer, where I was just sitting there, literally just pounding away with the keys, working things out and working out questions for the students. Because obviously, if you don't know the answer, you've got to sort of word it in such a way where they have to sort of calculate it for themselves, to turn the question round on them. And also then obviously you're working out the answers as well at the same time. So
I hope you didn't lose too many photographs on your mobile phone.
Yeah, no, they were just the fun ones. So it was rubbish, you see. So we went out to sea kayaking. So we got these kayaks. Went, oh, that's such a great idea. And I'm typical. I'm like, well, I can swim, so I'm not going to fall in, and I can kayak, so I'm not going to fall in. So I phoned down the front, as you do. Off I went for a paddle. Came back, and we put the boats at the beach, and she went, oh, I just fancy swimming. And of course, I just went in for a swim then. So I drowned my phone. It spent 3 days in rice, and then it ended up in the bin. But luckily, I had backup.
Good.
Thank goodness for the cloud.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie.
My question from me next. If the chemicals presumably are all imported, I assume they're really expensive then, aren't they?
No.
Or is it still cheap?
It's cheap.
All right, because my question was really, you know, if they're expensive, is that not a good way to educate people to only use what you need to use and only use it when you need to use it?
No, because the lack of regulation also means it's like low tax as well. So if you think about a lot of the price of things that we buy, like in the UK, would have sales tax. Yeah. And if it's been imported in bulk, it wasn't particularly expensive. Because I mean, you'd think even things like reusing cartons, you know, the sort of the plastic pollution that was everywhere. You know, it was terrible. At one point, I couldn't find the photograph of this. At one point, this guy was proudly showing me what would have been a pesticide washdown area, a filling area, where here's the spray tank. We put this in here like this. And I said, well, what happens? I just as you do, you know, what happens if there's a spill? You know, I thought, well, we'll see what the answer to that is. And he just went, here we have, if we spill, and he picked up the hose that he was filling the tank with. And he said, we wash it from what would have been a perfect, it was actually looked quite bunded actually. I like what was a piece of concrete. And he said he just jet washed the concrete with his hose, and straight off the back of it, there was a running ditch. And I'm like, oh, lovely. And it's actually in the Caribbean, a running ditch. It was a foot deep anyway. So technically, I suppose it was a river. Just straight down. And I said, so where does it go from here? And he goes, well, in the river. And then out to sea. I'm like, oh, lovely.
Yeah, great.
Great. Yeah. I'm very pleased because his concrete was clean.
He's cleaned that bit. Yeah, my God. Yeah. Stark contrast.
That's the lecturer. That was the lecturer. Oh, that's brilliant.
Different world. Different world. Next question is from Nigel Eade. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Hi, Marion. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I was in the Caribbean very early on in my travel career, so I've been to a few of those places. I worked in Africa for many years after that, and I was always quite surprised how the textbooks were very old style in terms of how they worked. And so my question more is, as with many education systems now, these curriculums have moved more into life skills and how-to type approach, as opposed to just purely scientific. So I wondered, how easy was it for you to update the textbook, which might have been quite old, in a way that it might have been more useful for what I presume was mostly subsistence techniques, that most of these guys might be using after school, and how much you balance that with the commercial side, because you did mention some commercial enterprises and products in your talk. That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. One of the things I found I'm incredibly frustrated about was the fact that agricultural science, that you've got your 3 sciences in the Caribbean, and those students who can't achieve those 3 sciences are angled towards agricultural science. So that's, if you like, their 4th science for the students who are not able to do biology, chemistry and physics. So if you take that, that's what your gene pool of students is like, okay, their pass rate is 20%. And why would you have something so hard that 4/5 of the students fail it? Why would you do that to them? I just think it's crazy. And then the syllabus itself had things in there that was beyond. I've got A-level biology, and it was beyond A-level biology. And I was like, why are you doing this to these students? It's so hard. And it was in the original textbook, it would be sort of like, it was very verbose. It was all written, and it was written from, a dictionary definition was very clearly written, but it wasn't sort of in bold print with a nice sort of an arrow showing where was the actual definition, or you need to know this in a small box. It wasn't laid out nicely. So that was one of the things that I made sure that it did, was that it was laid out very sort of a student friendly way, and also bear in mind that they weren't always the most able students that were being sort of directed into this course in the first place. So yeah, in terms of the product, the actual, I get where they're coming from, is it covers everything, agro-engineering to food production to packaging to putting it on a supermarket shelf, and I get where they're coming from with that. I did think there was quite a lot of information, although when you get towards the sort of packaging post-harvest things, it's fairly similar to for most of your crops, if you like. So especially if you've got fruit crops, try not to damage it. It's kind of, you could, if you had the right sort of exam, you would be able to sort of describe how to handle post-harvest fruit and so forth quite easily. I thought it was one of the more challenging parts of it, was to make it user friendly, but also to have it had to have it still being in review in the Caribbean, because it had a review date, which was why we had to write it under pressure so that it went through on the next review. But now they're in the review phase, it's available, but the government are deciding whether or not it's going to be on their recommended list. If it hits the recommended list, then the sales will take off, although that won't influence me or have any impact on me. But the review list was they're taking their time as they review it, but it's to make sure that it contains every part of the syllabus. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure.
it's sort of a bit of a balancing act, really. The stuff about for example, the cannabis didn't go in. So given that it is that one of the few places in the world where you can actually grow cannabis, and it does definitely have a market, you weren't allowed. We didn't put it in the textbook because they are under 16, and there was that decision. It was ready. It was a whole section. It was a little case study, and then we just went, no, take it out. We can't. They couldn't risk losing a recommended place on something like a case study on that. So we had another case study. We just swapped in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marion.
But I thought you guys were old enough to cope with cannabis case studies.
So we've got time for one more question from Mark Andrews, but he can't use his microphone, so I'll just read it out. Is the local tractor usage mostly in field or for general transport? And how do you think the increase in fuel prices might be affecting the Caribbean farmers?
Oh gosh, that's hard. In field for the tractors, there's not a lot of tractor use. Like I said, there was quite small. Everybody's a farmer, so it's like allotment size farming. So it's probably, I would think probably 80% hasn't got anything to do with these. I mean, these big estates that do the sugarcane, for example, that it won't impact them because they can afford it. They've got the rum, they've got the bagasse. They might put up the price of the bagasse, but that wouldn't so much influence them as the smaller farmers. And smaller farmers are generally using hand tools still. Price of fuel, I don't think it's going to have as much of an effect, because remember, they're part of the American market rather than the influences that we have over here, sort of controlled by Russia and the like. So I don't think the global fuel price would have too much of an effect over there, particularly as well because Trinidad's a producer. So I think they'll be all right. Maybe I'm wrong. Don't know. I've asked to go back. I said that they might need some more photographs. And in fact, funny enough, the guys, the senior publisher, is sending me some more books to go with the 11 to 14-year-old age range. So there may be another trip. So fingers crossed. I'll let you know, Mark. When I find out, I'll let you know.
Right, okay, we're nearly at 1 o'clock, so I better draw it to a close. So thank you very much, Marion, for that. Excellent pictures. Great presentation there. Thanks for taking the time out to do that for us. It's very much appreciated. Hopefully it's made everybody feel a bit warmer as well, those lovely pictures. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and hope you will join us for our next lecture on the 12th of April, where we'll be joined by Manny Vannon of Skillicorn Technologies, who will be talking about energy and nutrient recovery from municipal waste and industrial waste as well. So that'll be an interesting one. I'd also like to take the opportunity to remind everybody that we have our annual AGM and awards ceremony on the 27th of April, and that's at Class UK in Saxham. So this is going to include lunch, and it will also include a tour of their brand new facility over there, which really looks fantastic. So please do book, as places are already filling up fast. So all that's left to say is thanks again for everybody for joining, and see you again next time. Okay, bye-bye.